mentioned. So this session is called Rate and Review, but we're really going to hone in on how data can create citizen-centric services. So we're going to be looking at how kind of government departments and agencies across the public sector more broadly as well can harness insights from citizens, so the users of those services, and look at kind of how they can develop processes then that integrate the feedback from citizens to come back into the policy making process. So really make sure that we gather data on what citizens are thinking and feeling and how they're using those services. So we're in a bit of a straight line here.
That's her mum.
That's it, I can't see anyone. We have got another fantastic panel, and thank you again to the audience. You're keeping the energy up, which is brilliant. So I think on this one, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions, because probably different policy areas that you're working in, this is very relevant for you as well. So we will have the same format. I'm going to ask each of our speakers to give some opening comments, and then we will throw it open to questions from the floor. So we have with us for this session, we've got Christine Bellamy, who is Director of gov.uk for the Government Digital Service. We've got Daljit Rehal, who is the Chief Digital and Information Officer at HM Revenue and Customs. We've got Doreen Grove, who is Head of Open Government for the Scottish Government. Thank you for travelling down today. And we've got Beata Lisowska, who is Chief Data Officer at the London Borough of Camden. So great, again, that we've got kind of somebody out in the delivery side of things. Christine, I'm going to ask you to kick off with your opening thoughts.
With pleasure. I'm Chris Bellamy, I'm the Director of gov.uk. And data is sort of the lifeblood of everything we do at gov.uk. It's a wonderful brief to do this job. And without data, it would be impossible. So what do we mean by this magic word of data? So the context I work in and our teams work in, it's all about what the users tell us. So every single week, 30 million people log on to gov.uk. They go there to find things that are going to help them with their lives, what they need to deliver and how they need to feed their children and where they're going to go on holiday and everything you can imagine in between. But that interaction is important. It's a way of us being able to think about what we do next. That information, that core set of data is the lifeblood of what we do. And then we also have this great qual data that we gather, because people give us feedback. My goodness, do they give us feedback? But that information is almost like unique, because we don't know the individual. It's not personalised. But the size and scale of it, because about 4% of those 30 million every week tell us what they think. If you put those two numbers together, big data set and that qual data, you're starting to see real patterns. And we've been able in the last few years, through COVID, with everything that's happened in Ukraine in the last year, to sort of see those data sets in a different way. And it's fundamentally changed what we've done with our product. And actually, it's really informed, in some instances, what we go on to do potentially in policy. Because what you find is it's never what you thought the answer was. The questions that people raise are different ones. I'll take a really small example, but this time last year, at the awful moment where the tragedy of losing the Queen, the biggest request, the biggest question on gov.uk was, oh my goodness, it's a bank holiday. I'm really worried about when I'll get paid, my benefits, because I've got children to feed. But that information meant, working with partners with DWP, we were able to really take that problem away. DWP already knew what they were doing, but the data set had changed and transformed what we did for those users over that weekend. So for us, data is everything that we do. And the more we use it for good, the better our products will be. It's sort of the lifeblood of everything that we do day to day.
Thanks. I really like what you said there, because I think that don't make assumptions about what people are thinking, but also that sense of bringing together different types of data. So as you're saying, the quantitative with the qualitative, and that's where you start to see some of the real insights.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Christine. Daljit, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, from HMRC perspective, if you take away data, we are nothing. We are a data organization. It is driven by data. It's just been a long journey where that data has been collected in a very inefficient, manual way. We still have practices that make people fill out forms. They get submitted, somebody reads them, and a lot of the stuff is done through letters. Even though we have an excellent online digital platform, without which we could not have done what we did during the pandemic. However, we've got a long way to go, and the way we are looking at it is following on really some of the common themes there. You can spend a lot of time with consultancies, with people that are experts in customer insight to come and show you what your customers are after, and then design programs around it, or you can take advantage of the 45 million times they interact with you almost every year, and if you're not learning from that, then you're actually missing the point. So we've started the journey of listening to what customers are telling us through the digital channels, and then consolidating as much as what we've got onto those digital channels. We've started to now push out new capabilities onto our app, and I hope some of you have experienced that, or you certainly will, in the years to come. And we've started to think about now looking at all of this information in real time, in joining up what's happening online with the phone calls and the phone channels, and correlating the two, and understanding what leads a customer to abandon a digital journey and instead call you. At what point does that happen? What do we do about stopping that moment they're tripping over the carpet in your digital world and calling you instead, and smoothing and continuously improving that process. And then also on top of all of that, the adoption of AI technologies to process the data. We only, ethically, we only use AI where the end results can be explainable, and there's always a human in the chain. But nonetheless, even with that, there's a huge amount that can be automated, especially processing letters and forms that people are still sending us. And above all, there's a growing recognition. You don't decide as an organization what looks good digitally. It's the entirety of the internet that does that. So the whole life experience of individuals when they interact with whatever they're doing online sets the expectation of what they expect from you. So if you've gone onto your online bank and done bish bash bong and changed this, that and the other, that expectation is now set. When you deal with us, you're having to supply your data again. You're having to, you're going through all this. No matter how good you think you are, it needs to be as good as the last digital experience that customer enjoyed, and that is the challenge.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daljit. So interesting, because when I was saying how do you actually get that feedback from users, I was envisaging, a process where you proactively go out and you ask people, but you're saying actually alongside that there's all of these touch points where people are using our systems anyway, and that's all valuable data, and then using some of these new technologies to kind of analyse that. And I will come back in the questions on this sense of we need to be as good as the private sector as well, and customers' expectations of what they want from a digital service, because I'm really interested in that point as well. Thanks, Daljit. Doreen, over to you.
So I can tell you when I pick up the phone, it's the point I find myself swearing.
Not at me.
Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, to say I'm not a signed-up member of the Edinburgh Mafia. I stepped on my specs last night, which is why I'm wearing my son's specs. I couldn't see any of you otherwise. So I'm head of open government in Scotland, and I kind of come at this at the opposite direction from most of you, I guess. I'm thinking of the citizen-centric, and actually, can we drop the word citizen? Many of our most vulnerable people are not citizens. We need to be accessible to everyone. And I think the work that my team do, looking at how we use both the open government processes of accountability, transparency, and citizen participation, it needs to affect everything. It's the governance of how we govern. and being thoughtful about how we use data and digital, being thoughtful about what are the ethics of our moral decision making? How do we look at giving all of us as civil servants the tools and the competence and confidence to deal with data and information? I also, full declaration here, I'm also an archaeologist, and I worked in archaeology for 30 years. And for me, data is no more and no less than any other bit of information. And we've always used evidence-based policy. But this gives us the ability to just gather in so much more and to use it in a much more refined way, in a much quicker way. But that comes with a load of responsibilities about finding out whether the risks and benefits that we identify as public servants are recognized by the public. The fiscal cost of failure of public policy is enormous, and it's barely counted. But we are now able to be really thoughtful about how we use data and information, not just to formulate policy, but also to be accountable, to go back and ask the public whether that we achieved the things that we set out to do. So having a way of democratizing data and information. It isn't our information as government, it is the information of those who it's about. So being really thoughtful about how we do that.
Thanks, Doreen. I mean, loads in there, but you know, everything you said, that everything should be kind of seen through the view of the customer, the user. I take the challenge on citizen. I guess I was thinking not necessarily UK citizen, but more citizens kind of the world.
Sadly, a lot of people aren't citizens.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't citizens, yeah. And then, as you say there, the democratization of data, it's not our data, it's everybody's data. And do the public, though, understand what we're doing with the data, what the risks are, but also what the opportunities are? So lots of things there to consider. Thank you, and Beata, over to you.
So from my point of view, working for the local government, services to us are frontline services, right? So think adult social care, but also bins, also housing repairs. If you look at the numbers, we have 150 applications which serve 600 lines of services, right? So we are collecting a lot of data already about our residents, citizens, people within our borough. And that, because we are not fixing the foundations like any other organization really, and we are on the same journey, we are underusing the value that we have already, the systems that we've got at the moment. Currently, we are engaging with our tenants and knocking on their doors, asking how we are doing, like, you know, as a landlord. And because it's a survey, the responses we are getting, it's a small sample size, right? So this is where we are aiming to look at actually taking the more value of that operational data and to supplement what we are getting as well from them, from our tenants, from that door knocking exercise, right? So it's about fixing those foundations so you can unlock that power and that you can start to join up some of the stuff so you can understand your population, your citizens, people who live within your borough better. So that's one. And the second thing, building actually on your point, which is about asking citizens permission to use their data. And obviously we're all talking about AI, we're talking about linking data, we're talking about doing fun stuff with it. But actually through our recent engagement with our citizens through the Camden Data Charter, we found that people want to learn and about what we are doing with their data, and they want to be educated and they want to give the permission. If they do give permission, we can then create services where it's up to a citizen to say, for example, yes, I'm happy for you to link my personal data across your systems so that you can give me, for example, a personalized list of offer that council has for me, right? That you might be, for example, pre-approved for, and which means that there's less bureaucratic steps for a regular person to do. And one actually of the quotes that we got from a citizen was, it is important to get people to understand that data isn't something that is used against you, because that was my theory when I came here. And I think that this is quite important point to make in here. So that's that. And last one is that if we are using data for novel use, that we should do it in small little chunks, innovate, implement, test. If it works, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too, and just move on and see what sort of value and monitor the impact of that novel use of data to improve the services and service delivery as well. So I'm looking at that more than just digital product.
Great, thanks. So you're echoing what we've heard previously, in that there's the gathering of the data routinely, and then you're supplementing it by these particular kind of initiatives to go out and gather more qualitative data. But there also seems to be a recurring theme, which is we've got a lot of civil servants now that are gathering new data, but that's kind of taking away resources from fixing those foundations that you need in terms of the standards and the systems and everything as well. So it's how do you get that balance right with limited resources as well? So maybe that's something we could come back to. I am going to throw open to the audience in a minute, but I wanted to pick up myself on a question to all of you. You mentioned this issue of how do you get people, citizens, people, the public, to give permission to public servants to use their data, to link their data in different ways. And, we all know, we all do it ourselves. We will give over data to Google, we'll give over data to Netflix, we won't question that. But we will question giving it over to the public sector. Is that because we haven't communicated well enough as public servants what we're going to use that data for? Or is it, I'm quite happy to give my data to Google because I know Google's going to give me a great service. And I don't feel like the public sector's giving me a good enough service, they don't deserve my data. So just your thoughts on why do people give over their data to the private sector and maybe not trust the public sector? Christine, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think all the data tells you that there has to be a payback.
Yeah.
So it's about ease of use, really. So, and there's also an added complication about trusting government, so that's there as well. But if you just take the ease of use first of all, fundamentally, if we're using data to make it easier for you to use services, the likelihood is that people will give you that data, and you should be transparent in showing that back. So we talk about something like the HMRC app and the work that we're doing with One Login in gov.uk. That is really transparent about the data that we're using and feeding that back and how it's joined up. So that's helpful. But actually, the big problem people were worried about was, is that something we should be doing in the UK? And all the evidence is saying, if it's easier for me to fill in a form because it's already pre-populated, if it's easier to find out what services I'm due, I'm absolutely fine with that. The problem is, if we don't give the payback, then why do it in the first place? And that's the sort of conundrum we've got to. I think we're worrying more about the risk. And in worrying about the risk, we're not thinking what the benefit is for the user. So things like banking are a great example where we probably thought a few years ago that you would never do that sort of transaction of scale with banks. Actually, now it feels like a really safe environment. An app on your phone, you can start to do it. And I think our users are expecting that from government. So I think it's all about, for most users, not all, for most users, the ability to make the service should feel like it's improving because of it. And the final thing is we should always have services that don't rely on data. So there should always be another way that people can access the same service if someone doesn't want to give it you. But it's about ease of use.
I'm going to change the order a little bit. So, Beata, do you agree with that? Is that what you're finding?
I do think that this is a social contract, really, and it is about the trust and how much we're putting out there. And instead of talking data in give me your data, it's about this is a service, this is what you're getting, and this is how data helps us deliver better service. So normalizing talking about data in the aspect of regular service delivery rather than making it a thing, which is like a technical thing or it's a security thing. And I think explaining that and normalizing that is going to really help, and that's what we are seeing as well from our residents.
Thanks. And Doreen, so you mentioned yourself kind of the ethics of all of this, and do you think the public are right to be a little bit nervous about giving over their data or allowing their data to be used by governments in different ways?
Yeah. Frankly. So in Scotland we have an ambition to be an ethical digital nation. And we asked the question rather than making the assumption. So we've done a fair amount of work, deliberative work with panels of the public, looking at what are the principles they want government to follow in order for the use of their data to be acceptable. And that's helped us build our strategies, whether it's the health data strategy or our more broad strategy. But it is not making assumptions. Go out and ask. You can do that in all sorts of ways. There are all sorts of tools, be they user research or a randomized citizen jury, which we've done. But it isn't good enough to make the assumption, whether it's knocking on the doors as you've done, or whether it's doing qualitative surveys. There are all sorts of ways we can do this, and we must, and constantly test ourselves. Because I think there have been a number of mishaps in the use of government data, and that undermines all the fabulous work that we know so many of the people in this room are doing. But unless we can demonstrate to the public that we are trustworthy to hold their information, then we've got to keep going back and proving we're trustworthy.
Yeah. Daljit, you're nodding on that, so your thoughts on trust?
I think, the key word in all of that is trust. But, I mean, to be slightly controversial, I don't think there's a private sector, public sector divide here. I think if you're in any regulated private sector business, you've got all of the hurdles that you have in a public sector organisation. Personally, I think the problem with a department like mine isn't we don't have the data. Yeah, we have the data because you have to give it to us. It's the law. It's not a permission-based thing. Yeah, we have it. It's more about, are we mature enough to take advantage of it? And there are many things that we need. For example, there are hurdles. We can, by acts of parliament, we are only allowed to do with that data what its original intention was. So we can't just, okay, you can have a little bit of this if you want EWP, and you can have a bit of, we can't. We are kind of regulated in that way. So that's the bigger hurdle for us. In terms of my experience has been, you have to get permission from customers in the private sector as well, and they're not giving it. The reason why people like Google get away with it is really it's the people are willing to give it because of what they're getting back, and really they're kind of selectively ignoring what potential there is for someone like Google to do what they want to with that data. But
and also maybe sometimes it's really in the small print that you're giving the data. It's not very obvious.
But the bigger point I was going to make is that there is the point the previous speaker was making on the keynotes, that there is this whole point about ambient data collection. And I think that's, we already probably have everything we ask for, right? Probably DVLA has a bit, and NHS has a bit, and all these departments, we've probably got it all, we're just not allowed to share it. But there's an even more fundamental part to it than that even, which is, do we even want people to send us their data? Do we need them to send us their data? There are technological solutions like distributed computing and distributed ledgers, for example, which would mean you don't give me anything, you just put it somewhere in the center, and I can interrogate it for my rightful use of that. But we don't seem to be adopting those technologies. There's a lot of resistance to taking that sort of approach. But certainly, there are many technological answers to this.
That could take us down a whole Another avenue of digital IDs and all
Yeah.
of that kind of thing as well. Okay, we're going to throw it open to the audience. Who would like to ask the first? So we've got a question here. I'll take these two together for efficiency reasons, and then we'll come over here. So gentlemen there, if you'd like to put your hands up again, thanks.
Hi, it's Paras from Maritime and Coast Guards. My question is, today itself we have heard a lot about AI, and we have used that word quite a lot. It's not new technology, but thanks to ChatGPT and all, we are using it more. Tomorrow there'll be something else. VR is coming as well and all. So there's a future which is full of opportunities. And then there is a past where we have paper-based system, then the system changed to another one, then to another one, then to another one, and our servers didn't talk to each other, so the quality of data is questionable and all. So the question is, how much effort and time and cost should we dedicate, say roughly in percentage, to future or opportunities and the present and the past, where it's a lot of this there, as you said, a lot of data is not questionable, it's already sent to us. So how much time and effort should we put in the future and in the past?
Great question. Did you say you're from the Maritime Coast Guard?
Yeah.
So the question there, and we'll take the one behind you as well, the question there is, how much time should we spend worrying about data we already have, or because the future's looking so exciting, should we be thinking more about kind of AI and VR and all those? Thank you. And the question behind as well.
Hi, my name's Henry. I actually work at Borough. I had a question. I thought the theme at the beginning around combining kind of user-centered design and digital services with kind of data analysis, performance data, all that kind of stuff was really, really interesting. I wanted to ask about, so I think that often works really, really well in flagship services with big budgets where you bring together a kind of MDT, a multidisciplinary team with kind of all those different specialists, but it sometimes falls down with the kind of long tail of small volume, much lower budget services that government has to deliver. And I wondered if maybe interested in the central gov and local gov answer to this, like have you found ways to make that work in that kind of long tail of smaller services?
Thanks. So kind of a resource question about, can you do that kind of dual analysis where you haven't got quite the big flagship schemes and less of a budget? Okay, so you can answer one or both of those questions. Daljit, I'll start with you on this one.
I think, in a funny way, they're both the same question. I don't think you can ignore the past and just focus onto the bright future, because that's how we end up in this in the first place, never finishing the job. But I think the answer to it is to deliver the future in a way that takes care of the past. So the investments that we are making in modernizing our IT and our systems landscape should be done in a way that actually takes advantage of those investments, so that we've got, for example, some of the platforms that come natively with capabilities to do analytics. You no longer need to put your data in a data warehouse. You can use it straight from the platform. So if you're going to modernize the platform, you need to modernize the practices with it, including bringing the history along. And I think that's a more sensible use of the investment. And I think it also addresses the second question, which is, you're right. So the flagship, they get all the attention and all the funding. But if you invest in those flagship programs and initiatives in a way that's more like platform thinking, then they will take care of the bits that are on the periphery. Yeah. So it is better to deliver a platform and a framework that's flexible than to simply a new application, which is still yet another black box. With that platform, you then get the advantages of citizen coding, low coding, all of that then allows people in the business teams to start doing things that they're waiting for their IT people to do by themselves. I think this is probably also an answer to where are all the future IT developers are going to come from. You know what? They're not going to come all from the IT departments. They're going to come from people in the business saying, I know how to do this and I'm going to do it.
I can feel the whole panel wanting to come in on this. Beata,
So I'm going to be controversial. I think that we are dealing with the problems of the past because it was led by IT and because we have solutionized too many of the data problems. And this is why we do need sustainable funding to sort out the data and liberate it really and make it more portable, right? So stop thinking in it in terms of platforms, applications, but more like, okay, how can we be platform agnostic, but how can we expose that or the data that we already have through APIs, through other endpoints to serve the purpose and specific use cases and those flagship use cases that we've got. Your question about helping smaller teams, like I don't think that there is a golden bullet. I just think that this needs to be a little bit of a conscious effort and not going after the next shiny thing. AI is not going to be the answer to everything, the problems that we've got. Sometimes the answer, at least for Camden, is just sorting out some of the data we already have and sorting out data governance, how the data is inputted and ensuring that the quality of that data that we're putting in those systems is good enough and that people have the data literacy skills to be better at putting that information in, processing it and getting it out, and everything else will follow.
Thanks, Beata. I feel like I need a T-shirt now that says "Liberate Data." That's going to be what I'll wear next year at this. Doreen, did you want to come in?
So one of the most interesting statistics I ever heard was from a deputy chief constable who said that serious and organised crime spend 30% of all of their income on data and digital technology. Governments are nowhere near that. And your resource question, I think, is a really important one, because I think it is what we should be looking at all of this as is it's a part of our system. Think of your system and not just whether it's the data or an app or a tool, but look what in your system can make the change. That might be something quite simple, and some of the flagships waste an awful lot of money. And are looking for the next shiny thing because it's the next shiny thing, rather than actually look at what it is you're trying to achieve. So what's the job? Who should be involved in that job? And in what outcomes are you seeking to achieve? And then decide whether that's the digital tools are the tools that are going to get you there. And very often that's not the case. I agree with you. It's much more about some of the data hygiene. Get your system straight first.
Get the foundations right.
Yeah.
Christy, I know we've got lots of other questions, but do you want to add on this?
Just a couple of bits. I don't think we think about the future enough. I think so much has happened with technology in the last few years, and with the data lens, and we've touched on it on the panel, that there's an opportunity to try and think about how we can get a real change from the processes that have come. So large language models they've been around for quite a number of years, and there's an opportunity, as an example, to do something with it. So I think we can pivot to do a bit more about future thinking, but we should absolutely think about the past. I think the problem is we just gather so much stuff because it's interesting, and we can learn a little bit from the commercial sector here, who their data-driven points are very specific, like what data do we collect and why, and what do we do with it? And if you don't do anything with it, then why collect it? And we have too much interesting stuff, which takes too much time to analyse, and we do nothing with. So I think whether it's past or future, that lens is really helpful.
Thanks, Christine. I think we had, did we have a question over here? I'm conscious I haven't been to that side. I thought somebody had their hand up over here. No? Okay. So we've got a lady down here. And is there a question right at the back? I know there was another hand up before. No, okay, okay, yeah, gentleman there. So we've got a question here, and then there's a gentleman behind. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Marie Cook from the Ministry of Defence. I'm going to take it right down to the personal side, seeing as we're talking about citizens and things like that. So I think Daljit said that we already have a lot of data on us as people. And so if we're talking about people, if all these systems were to talk to each other and share the data, what actually truly would be the benefit to me as an individual? So for example, working for the Ministry of Defence, it wouldn't matter to me if my GP knew that I worked for the Ministry of Defence. So how could sharing that data actually help me as an individual and everyone else in this room as an individual?
I think that's a great question, because it's that challenge to civil servants. Can you explain why linking up all this data will make my life better? So I think that's kind of the question. That's the first question. Then it's gentleman there, if you can put your hand up again. Thank you. We'll take this question as well.
Hi, Adam Millward from Metadata Works. I guess my question was probably from Beata, but also the rest of the panel when it comes to measuring the impact of data. I think a single data set can have huge amounts of value and cover lots and lots of different use cases. I guess the question is, how do you measure that impact to make sure it is recorded so that the data infrastructure gets the investment that it needs?
Okay, so putting a value on data and a value maybe on linking data. How do you do that so that you can build the business case for more investment? Okay, so benefits to me as an individual, and how do we prove the value of data? Let me see, Doreen, I will start with you.
I should really start with an analyst. I'm rubbish at this stuff. On your point, I'm absolutely with you. Why would we link the fact that you work for the defence organisation with your GP record? No purpose. I think it's back to Daljit's point that we should only be collecting information that we can see a use for. And then there will be times where having... So during the pandemic, we know that there was a lot of data about race and ethnicity wasn't collected. And actually it would have saved lives. It isn't always obvious what the scale of information that will be useful in the next stage. So there's a kind of eye, but not entirely eye on that one. And on measuring impact, I think there is nothing more important than having a proper system of analysis that is looking at, so you did this, so why did you bother doing that? So after during the pandemic, we put together data sets in order to help manage it. And one of the things we did at the end of that was work with ScienceWise to ask the public whether that sharing was something that they agreed with, whether we had got the balance right between privacy and managing to help save lives. And I think there are all sorts of ways that can be done digitally, but I think it's a hugely important point, because we shouldn't be not measuring unless we can demonstrate that it is of value to us. Then actually it is yet more shiny things.
Thanks. Christine, I'm going to come to you, but just to clarify, I don't think Daljit was saying... Daljit, you can... I don't want to... What's the opposite of mansplain? I don't want to feel like
mansplain. He's our token man.
So I don't think he was saying that if we have information about where you work, for example, we're automatically going to link all that up. What you're saying is linking up certain databases could be useful.
No, certainly. And I think the question was in support of what I was saying, really. Yeah. And I don't think... it's a case-by-case thing where you need to have that information. If you, for example, are dealing with somebody who's had a bereavement and they're trying to settle their inheritance tax, at a sensitive time to that person, you're asking them for, who they're married to, how many kids do they have they been previously married, have their partners who've got married been married to other people, all these invasive questions that you potentially don't need to if you already had that information through other departments. So it's a case-by-case thing. It's where people are feeling the pain of having to deal with this. That's why it needs to be sort of inside-led through, in this particular scenario, it would make sense if we could do it. But it's not automatically joining up. I'm actually for not even sending me the data, but putting it somewhere where if I need it, I can get it. As probably the most sort of trustworthy model and way of doing this. So So that's where
Yeah,
that's what I was trying to say. Really, it's a case by case.
thanks. So just for everyone else in the room, you're asking, would as a civil servant, will all your data get shared with different government departments, and would that be? But I don't think that's what you were saying.
No. It already is very, very tightly governed, especially where you work. so there are, protected.
Have you just let out that there's a spook in the room? Is that
Yeah.
what
We've seen what happened in Northern Ireland with
Yeah.
so there's protection built in. I think for you to do your job as an analyst or whatever you needed the data for is where you'd see the benefit, not necessarily the fact that suddenly every department knows about you, which is not where I was coming from. Yeah.
So, Christine, I want to take you back to the two. What's the benefits then of? Can we
Yeah.
explain the benefits of linking up, and also how do we value the data?
So I think generally the way that people interact with government now is incredibly siloed. We've got our org chart and our departments, and that's how you interact with government. And so going forward, that fundamentally needs to change. I would say that, wouldn't I? But in doing that, why would you do that? It's because actually as a user, you come to this thing and you're not really bothered about which department. You need to know what your interaction with government, and you need the help when you need it. And so the fact that things are joined up makes it easier for you to be in control. So the control sits with you, but you are then in a situation. So if you're a working mum who gets a bit of tax credit and you're thinking about how that'll do and how many hours you've worked, and if you work more hours, it might mean your pay's gone down. And there's this moment where you feel like you're in control of your situation because it's with you in real time. That's quite a way forward that we could get to in not that too far out. But for an individual, that's quite a change of how they interact with government. That is proactive government. So I think for heavy users of government, and there's so many of them, and then we're not always them. Sometimes in our lives we really are, and then for years we almost just pay our taxes and we're out of the system. But there are life events that we all go through in this room where if it was joined together, you would find it easier to navigate government. And therefore your interaction with it and how you felt about it would potentially there be more of a positive way forward as opposed to a negative.
Thanks, Christine. Did you want to say anything about how you put the business case for investment in data?
Yeah, I think that's getting better actually. I mean, our bit works into the Cabinet Office, and that realisation of benefits is critical. And so the big one I can cite at the moment, so the work that's gone into the One Login programme and the business case for that really had to say, it'd be great if everyone could sign in one way to government, but so what? What's the benefit to the user? What's the benefit to government? And in doing so, you start to really show how you can show that benefit case. So I think we're getting better as an organisation at that, but and data should be in every single business case we do going forward. We can't live it out, but I think people understand it now. I think when you present that, it's well read and it's an expectation it should be there.
Thanks. Beata.
So starting actually with why local government is completely different to those use cases that Daljit was just talking about. And this is that I do think that actually in local government, everything should be linked up and joined up by default, because this then translates into better services. You should tell your council only once something. We shouldn't be coming back to you and asking 3 times, is this your address, is it your name, this is your number, right? This is just better user design, really, a one-on-one. And also, we should, as a council, know better who we've got, for example, living on our estates, right? And if we do not link that data from 2 different systems, right, which are supporting 2 different directorates, which in a way are siloed, right, then we cannot see what's the demography, what's the need, we cannot look at interventions. And that links me back to tracking the return on investment on the data products as well, and looking at if and going back to the fixing foundations, which I know I sound like a broken record, but if you do know what your baseline is, like, you know, from the very basic statistics, like if you know how you're operating now, how you're wanting to transform it, if you're investing into a data, for example, tool or method that is going to fundamentally change it, then you can start looking at, okay, how your KPIs are changing. And also if you're starting to track something that you've never done before, and how that affects then and translates into our citizens and residents' lives. Interestingly, one bit of idea that we are toying with is using actually machine learning and models to look at what is the effect of some of the policies and interventions that we have on offer on the lives of our citizens, right? And if you think about this, that takes a lot of data. That is going to be expensive, but potentially that will enable us to then test some stuff, and then, like, for example, see, yes, this worked, this didn't, let's pivot.
Going back to one of the sessions we had earlier about evaluating kind of the impact. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left, so we've probably got time for one final question. Yes, gentleman, right in the middle there. If you keep your hand up for me a second, Maria will come up with the mic. Thank you. Might have to pass it along. Thanks.
There's a...
Hi. My name is Ross Roberts and I work for DEFRA, so the Department for Food and Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So I work in fisheries policy, which is quite niche, but bear with me. So the policy I'm kind of working on is the introduction of bits of technology which will enable us to monitor what's going on in a fishing vessel and whether people are sort of complying with the rules that are in place, but also, you know, how they're interacting with lots of sensitive species and, you know, protected fish stocks that we want to manage better. So I guess I'm interested because partly it links to the point that one of you said at the start about data not being used against people. So in this case, it could actually be some cases that this kind of data could be used against people, but also I think the more wider point is that this data could be really, really beneficial and useful for all sorts of organizations on the science front, on the environment front. So it has all these potential use cases that we're still trying to figure out. But how do we sort of balance that tension with individuals who are there being monitored and their concerns about privacy and how we use that data? So aware it's a very niche case study, but interested in any thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, thank you, because that might be a niche one, but I'm sure there are other examples where essentially you're bringing in technologies, you're gathering data on something that could have wide benefits, but may have negative impact for particular individuals. So how do you get that balance right? Christine, I'll start with you.
I'm the best person to answer this because my dad was a deep sea trawlerman, and as a child he ended up in Ireland for about 2 weeks in, I think it was a prison cell, but I think it was the pub for overfishing. So I know this market. I'm in. I think it's a really valid case, isn't it? And I think it's about what that's for. So the key about data is what was the intent? And that's a different intent. There's a business need for that, which becomes it might be a climate need, it may be a policy need. I think that's fine, actually, as long as you're really clear about the scope and the extent of that scope, and it doesn't extend beyond it. I think that's absolutely fine. And there'll be plenty of examples like that, I think, but you should be really keen on doing it and doing it for the right reasons.
And I wonder if there were some examples during COVID where we were asked to do things for the good of society, but maybe individually that could have had some consequences for us as well. Daljit, your thoughts on that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Was your dad a fisherman?
No, my dad was an engineer. But I think, look, there's a danger that we forget. This is what the private sector's been doing for a long time. It's called segmentation. It's called behavioral analysis. It's called, you know, you look at how your customers are behaving. You create new products for them based on that. You always do it with permission. They're always opted into allowing you to do it, and you never use that to discriminate against them. You'd never deny them a service as a consequence of it. Otherwise, you can get in trouble. But to build insight so that you can create better policy, I think that's an acceptable use, as long as you don't, You don't go and then deny that industry something, based on everything we've watched you doing, we're closing the fishing industry down, you can understand people would get upset with that, but to allow studies to happen so that insight can be, there's lots of positives that can come out of that if you do it with their permission.
I mean, it's blindingly obvious. It has to be done with, built with the fishing industry. And because it will affect them hugely and directly. And I've dealt with the fishing industry. Believe me, you want to be on good speaking terms with them. I think it is, but it is an example where you simply wouldn't even, if you were in private industry, you wouldn't begin to do that without doing your user research, without developing it absolutely with whoever it is you're monitoring. And that's not to say that they should then neuter it and make it not workable, but absolutely is one where you would want to get buy-in.
So there has to be kind of an honesty up front that this might have consequences.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it will.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's as well like this invisible threshold, right? Which is like, how much appetite and how much versus like, the opportunity that something brings versus the risks associated with it, right? And at some point you come to that threshold, and that's when you start, talking to the people, right? And explaining the impact and the potential benefits and bringing them along on that journey, right? And then you start building all those handrails as well associated with any project, right? And it brings back as well to the impact, right? Because any project you do, there needs to be like, what's the impact on it? How are you monitoring it? How are you evaluating it? And then how are you reporting on it as well? So don't just start something and then go quiet, like take people on a journey with you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Again, we've turned red, so I think we're at the end of our session, but that's been a fascinating discussion. I think, again, some of those messages that I can't get the basics right, you have to absolutely get the basics right, but also you've made me think about different types of data and how we bring those together and really focusing on what are we trying to do to ultimately make the world a better place for the people that we are serving. Thank you so much again to our fantastic panel, to Christine, to Daljit, to Doreen, and to Beata. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.